Perfect. So we're live. So welcome everyone to our latest Talking Talent event. My name is Paul Power. I'm an associate talent partner at Accelerate, and I'm delighted that you're all joining us for this really exciting topic. So the name of the Talking Talent event this time is How to Create an LGBTQ plus friendly culture at work. And I'm super excited to be joined by some of the leading experts in this field from all across Berlin. And yeah, it's amazing. And thank you so much to all the speakers for joining us today. So before we kick off, I would like to explain what Talking Talent is. So Talking Talent is basically a community of speakers where we invite some of the experts in their respective fields from startups in Berlin, London, Paris, and we basically ask them questions, and generally they're live events, but since Corona happened, we've gone digital, and we're hoping to continue this in both formats and really get speakers from across the world to discuss, trends in hiring and talent acquisition and share their expertise with the future experts. So yeah, thank you to everyone for joining. So basically, I also want to introduce Accelerate, which powers Talking Talent. So Accelerate is a recruitment startup based in Berlin. Essentially, we're an embedded service. So we have different service offerings, such as our in-house model, X, and employer branding. Our in-house model is essentially where you get an internal in-house recruiter. We come to your company maybe 3 days a week. We absorb your culture and we do your hiring. We do everything from, setting up processes, finding those really niche, hard candidates, and advising you on things like interview training as well, and really joining your team. We also have X, where if you need someone a bit more senior to join your company, we have a huge portfolio of people across the world. And so if you need any help with that, please feel free to reach out. And additionally, last but not least, we do have employer branding as well. So if you need any help with recruitment marketing, employer branding, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me after this event. Perfect. So I would love to introduce all of the speakers of this event. Jorge, if you could please kick us off and just introduce yourself.
Yeah. So, Jorge, originally from Portugal, been working at TaxFix since 2018. I joined the company. It was really, really small, around 35 employees. And I've been driving diversity and inclusion within the company.
Nice. Thank you. Rodrigo?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rodrigo. I work for Uber. I'm based in Amsterdam. I work currently as a diversity and inclusion business partner for our EMEA and APAC region. And before moving to D&I, I was actually in recruiting. So recruiting is something that is also very, very close to my heart. And before also joining the D&I team, I was leading our Pride employee network for 2 years in the region as well.
Nice, thank you. Armando?
Hi there, my name is Armando. I work at CloudReach since about 1 year. And we recently started because of this movement of the Black Lives Matter really going strong on diversity. We just kicked off everything. But before, I used to work also in diversity at a big bank I used to work before, and I was leading the Pride network as well, and founded that.
Nice, thank you. And then finally, Oana. I think you're on mute.
Hi, everyone. Oana here, super excited to be on this panel. I think it's really, really diverse, first of all, and representative for the industry. I recently moved to Berlin, implicitly Zolando. I am a senior talent acquisition lead for tech part and overarching responsible for diversity and inclusion actions on that side as well. Originally from Romania, moved in a couple of different countries, lived in Dublin where you are, Paul, and lived in Amsterdam, I think, where you said you are as well. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much for the invite.
No worries. Thank you to everyone. And so basically the next step is that we're going to discuss some topics. And the speakers are really going to give their thoughts and opinions on these topics, and they're all oriented around, supporting the LGBT community at work and in the workplace. And so if you have any questions for the speakers, please feel free to post them in the questions tab, and then we'll have some dedicated time at the end. So yeah, thank you to everyone, and let's jump straight into it. So the first topic. So to all the speakers, from your experiences, what are the best practices to creating a more inclusive LGBTQ plus company culture? And so yeah, would anyone like to kick that one off?
I can start. I think I'm the only one. Unmute. And I have a very unpopular one, and I'll leave the easy ones to the others.
Perfect.
That's okay. So there are many things, right, that we see that organizations are doing right. There are many things that we see that people are trying, and they're analyzing, and they're kind of iterating on some of the best practices I get there, which I think is the right thing to do. We won't necessarily get it right from the beginning. But one that I start being more and more grateful for when I see it in organizations is data, using data for making decisions, right? And I've seen a couple of organizations lately, and I see this at Zalando as well, really pushing towards that. So if we think, for example, I guess some of your organization, most of us, we have a Voices survey or a pulse survey, the general engagement survey, right? And having disaggregated data based on different categories or minorities within your organization can give you some very nice insights of how does actually everybody feel, right? Where do I need to focus my attention? And that I saw very useful when it comes to prioritizing actions, whether it's to build an ERG, whether it's to add more representation and things like that. So I'm kicking it off with count, collect, compare.
Perfect. Nice. Thank you. Data. I think data is like the number one thing that's on everyone's lips at the moment, and it really is the currency of today. Yeah. So Rodrigo, what's your opinion on this topic?
There are a few things that come to mind. I think I'll maybe talk about two. One is the support of senior leadership. So I think that the baseline would be, let's say, the CEO or someone like this on that level, really setting up the tone on, let's say, Pride Month, and starting like that if you have nothing in your company. And then once that is done, that person talking about that in business meetings and things like that, right? Remembering, hey, we need to include LGBT folks when they're talking about diversity from a business perspective. So not only HR or the D&I team or even the employee resource group. So I think that is one, the leadership talking about that throughout the year, not only through Pride Month. The other point, and this one is very tricky and very difficult, but it's about the intersectionality, right? Because many times when companies, they do actions for LGBT inclusion, what they are doing is advance mostly cisgender gay men, in the majority of them white, especially in Europe, when the racial conversation is not so advanced, or people get very defensive about that. So I think remembering that, within that LGBT population, so you have people of color that have different needs, right? Than white people. You have trans that have different needs of cisgender people. You have lesbians that have different needs from gays, and the conversations and the pain points are very different for the population. So having that intersectional approach is vital. Otherwise, you're not gonna truly be moving the needle on inclusion. It's gonna be something a bit more performatic and not really changing the day-to-day.
Nice. Okay, perfect.
I completely, just to add up on that, I think it's very important what you just mentioned. Two of my biggest points is just to take a step back before going to the practices, is to really have the leadership understand that, diversity is out there as a strength, as a business strength, right? That makes businesses more productive, more creative, more innovative. So the leadership values really should resonate in this direction. Otherwise, it's really hard to make change happen, right? Because you can have a lot of employees that are in the company super motivated to implement something, right? Let's say about the LGBTQI topics. But then if the shadow of the leadership is always there in the sense, there's no way that there will be progress. And also, I think one of the biggest points that can make diversity advance is the autonomy and the authority of the people that are championing the diversity and inclusion initiatives, right? When you want to progress, when you want to do something, when you want to set up a network group, everything, if you have blockage time, it's really hard to make it more progressive and more future oriented in this sense. And as also you mentioned, Rodrigo, it's about the intersectionality bit. I think it's really important with this discussion that we kind of run away from the binary discussion, the two genders, when it's also focusing a lot. I see a lot of companies focusing a lot gender equality, gender pay gap, etc., etc. But I think diversity should be much more than that. So I think those are the two kind of key points that I would say, and everything else, the events, the announcements, the communications, everything else follows through after that.
Yeah, no, I agree with all the points. I also think it should be us as employees to push this forward. I mean, usually management is so busy with other things that this is like on the back of their heads, but they don't take action to it. And this is the experience that I have had so far in TaxFix, right? Just raise the questions, push the management to start talking about the topic, and then drive this yourselves. We cannot expect that management does everything. I do agree that they should talk about this and push this within the company. But for example, for a company as small as TaxFix, this is difficult, right? Because we are in hypergrowth at the moment. Difficult to have everybody's attention on it. So what I've been doing is really small steps to start really talking about this topic of diversity. And I started as simply as doing an overcoming bias workshop that people can attend, for example.
Perfect. Thank you all for sharing that. So I guess my question would be that, say I'm a very small early stage startup, and I know straight off the bat that I want to be, really inclusive, and I want to champion diversity from the start. Are there any simple things that I can implement from the get-go, in your opinion?
I can eventually I saw this happening with Pinterest, for example, or Atlassian. There are a couple of companies that made it very explicit from the beginning that this is a goal, right? And not just cover things out as in one big umbrella, but really address and also name members from their already community or external community to champion on behalf of, let's say, their hiring efforts or their talent development efforts, and really role modeling at every stage. I've encountered a lot of people at the beginning of growing a business, for example, talking about including more people that are not from, let's say, the initial group. How do I represent something that I'm not, right? How do I say that I want to be inclusive, but we're all guys here, or we're all straight, right? So I think this is a struggle that people have, and we shouldn't forget that even if they're trying, they're gonna have some obstacles and some learning. I think what Jorge is doing is the best thing to do at the beginning. Raise awareness for yourself first and learn. There's a lot that we are all learning at the moment, I would say, through all the movement that it's happening, and see what works for everybody there. I see in every survey that we take with big recruitment or leadership teams, what do you want more? And it's education and awareness. So that's I would say a good starting point always.
Yeah, and for important that we don't think okay, we should always look at the overall picture, but we should do baby steps, right? We shouldn't want everything at. When I started, I really wanted to do everything at the same time, right? This is actually my first experience as well, driving this topic. And little by little, I learned that little is accomplished if you try to drive everything at the same time. So simple actions like, for example, gender neutral bathrooms, having lunch and learns about talking about like LGBTQ topics. So really small actions, but again, engage with the management team to promote this and have like the open floor to do it. And this is something that I actually am pretty enthusiastic because I've been learning a lot. I've been making a lot of mistakes as well. But from the beginning, I mean, we were a startup with 35 employees and I was already discussing with our CEO these topics. So.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I think it's also very important, even if you want to do little steps, I think it's very important to have a strategy so that you know some of the key initiatives that you want to have. And it does need to be good, but I think somebody needs to be aware. And when I also mean somebody, I mean like a group of people, because I personally don't believe that, I mean, unless the organization is really big, right? But I don't personally believe that it's good to have one person dedicated always fully to diversity and inclusion, because what happens is that people may forget about the topic and then just push everything to that person, and it should be embedded in the business culture. So I think when you start driving a strategy, even if it's a small steps, you know, if you want unconscious bias, then you have to plan it at least twice a year in a way that, you know, if you want to do an event at a bar, you can, I mean, now Corona is a bit hard, but if you want to do it remotely, then you plan that. And I think step by step, you start to include things. Like one thing that we are looking into, for instance, is about like paternity, parental leave and everything. So instead of us focusing on maternity, parental, everything, we're going to focus on primary carer and secondary carer, which is kind of gender neutral. But the way this is very progressive in a way that the legal surroundings and the wording is very complex, in the sense that you need to observe the legal terminologies, but also, you know, be forward thinking in a sense. So I think these are like more like bigger steps, but these are also things that we can do on a short term to kind of really tackle the issues directly.
Perfect. So I've heard a few of you. No, I think the connection went for a second. We'll just see if we can get 2 more back. But yeah, I think whilst we're waiting for the other 2 to come back, I think what I've really noticed and what I've observed from what everyone is saying is that, you know, you're saying engage with management more. Oana, do you have any tips on how to engage with management? Because I imagine it could be quite intimidating for, you know, someone who's maybe in HR and they're saying engage with management. Do you have kind of any ideas or kind of advice as to how to do that?
I see your point a little bit. So maybe now I'm more used to it, right? So I'm like, I need to own it. It's my job, so it's happening. But if I think back and if I think of other people that want to do more, the staying curious, it's very important, right? You don't know what you don't know. This is somehow how I start all my conversations. So whenever I'm engaging a business leader, I want to understand first what's their, let's say, realm of awareness, right? Where do I start? Because if I start too hardcore on we need to do this, we need to do that, I'm losing them before I go.
So I think there might be some technical difficulties at the moment.
I hear her perfectly.
I don't know if you tell me, Paul?
hear you also?
So I can hear also.
I think maybe Paul has a problem with his internet.
Paul, that,
yeah. Okay, so people are here. I can see the chat. Thank you, Vidya, Katrina, and Danny signaling. Right. So I'll just carry on, and hopefully Paul will come back. I know he has some internet issues back on the island. So yeah, I think that was that would be my first go-to technique, like really take a step back and forget what I know so I can understand what they know, right? It's always a bit of learn and unlearn in order to create that bridge of communication. And when I think whenever I speak to leaders, it depends which ones, right? Like if I speak to a CFO or a CTO or a CEO, I do have a more overarching vision, and a conversation goes more into how the future looks like, right? May be longer term. But if I speak to team leads or people who are currently building teams or they're doing systems for performance evaluation, I'm always going back a little bit to the current composition of the, let's say, the talent market or current teams, because those are the things that they are dealing with at that point. And those are the issues that they want to solve, right? There is a little bit of a difference between, let's say, the people focus and the business/financial focus that I try to make a difference in between. And maybe you can also contribute. How are you actually approaching this? If you said, Jorge, you started this conversation with your leaders when you were 35 already, any particular things? Yeah.
No, I mean, it was easy because to a certain extent we were at a slow pace at the time, and being just 30, 35 people, it's really easy to engage with management because I was working right next to them, so I could nag them about this and could start the discussion. But afterwards, when we started growing and coming a little bit back to Armando, what he was saying, not driving this by ourselves, we created also within the company the diversity guild, right? To give like a platform for people to start discussing the topics and what our planning should do. We don't have like a strategy per se, but we do have a game plan for 2020 and what we want to achieve.
It's really good. One thing that I think it really helps is to, I mean, sometimes it speaks, like you can speak to the hearts of the people, but you can also speak to the, money and gains of the people, right? So one of the things that I always find very useful, I don't think it's the case in my current company, because our CEO is kind of very open to listen to people. But before, I think you can always pick up, students from Harvard and, see Google, all these big companies that have done the research. They've been there, done that, and it's all over the place, that it brings a lot of benefits for the business. And when you have this data to show off and showcase, when you don't have your own data, then it's really good way to kind of get the conversation started from the beginning. And yeah, I also see like there were lots of questions about like data and stuff like this. I think it's very important. We are at the moment at CloudReach trying to figure out how this is going to work, because there are different regulations across the world on how you collect data. France is almost impossible. Germany, so we are currently revising the process, but at the end, I would have to say that it's a business decision, a progressive business decision, and a risk-taking decision, where you collect the data and how you collect the data and how you store the data, right? Because there are many ways to do it. The question is how you do it. And the knowledge is out there, but it's really hard to tackle. So if we have a claim from a group, let's say a group of people that consider themselves identify as transgender, they say that they are not promoted, but imagine that we have 10, 15, then it's really hard to kind of correlate that with the salary bands to make sure that they're being paid accordingly, right? Because it is very sensitive data, and according to the GDPR, sensitive data is one of the hardest data kind of to manage. So the question is, are these people willing to give their information? Because that's the only way that we can actually like strategically tackle the issue directly. So it's at the end a business decision about having a bit more risk and collecting this data versus having no absolute risk but not being able to tackle these issues with data. That's what I believe.
And you're so right. When it comes to different countries, they have their different regulations. So I was working in Paris before, in France, and talking about race is almost forbidden by nature. But legally wise, you are not. Race does not exist in France, although you have. I think 20% of France's population is black, right? Because you have all these colonies, and you're never really going to integrate there is a charter of diversity that Germany has, France follows, and they are themselves seeing, I cannot assess if my efforts are working because I cannot measure against, who's receiving this new programs and basically changing all these programs. It's almost impossible if not help. So organizations can wear somehow the responsibility to take that on themselves, but it is tricky to navigate indeed.
Yeah, and I mean, as you were mentioning, I was working like the big company I was working for was a French company, and it's kind of you're not diverse, you're French, right? So it's kind of the mindset. You're not diverse, you're not French, and it's really interesting because we are. So I mean, it's kind of detouring a bit from the conversation. We had the Black Lives Matter call, and we had a really interesting person from UK talking about this. And there were some people from the panel, and one guy is working in France, and he's from America. So for him, he lives in a white neighborhood, and he's not discriminated at all because he's American and African American. So for people that live around him, he was considered to be, well educated, Obama, right, and everything. But the people there in Paris that he knows they are black, but from the colonies, tell him that he cannot fight their fight because it's a different world, right? So there is discrimination in France. There are things happening.
There is, yeah.
But it's just the way that the story the story basically was built out as differently in Germany with, the Jews in the past and the racial segregation, and with the Africans in France and colonies. So yeah, it exists.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. I had some technical difficulties. I don't know if you saw me freaking out, but I'm back now. And thank you to the speakers for maintaining the conversation while I was gone. Just shows you how great they are. And yeah, I think for time, we should move on to the next kind of slide and the next topic. So jumping straight into it, how do you celebrate your LGBTQ plus staff? Oana, to you.
Me again. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I know I'm picking on you. I'm sorry.
I felt I spoke like we need to give Rodrigo some words here, because I know Uber is doing some amazing stuff. I think it's been very interesting, right? Because June passed and we've been in COVID time, Black Lives Matter time, a lot of times to be a bit more sensitive, I would say, to the whole planet and the distress that is happening. And I've seen this very interesting in our community now, not necessarily having the space as before to do a pride or to do here in Germany's Christopher's Day parade, I believe. And they've switched it to a virtual event that is now in the making, right? With the same type of inspirational and sharing panels and events, but also something fun where people can find themselves again into, let's say, a regular time, a normal time, a normal time. So we have some DJs coming in and doing a virtual party, right? So we do not want to miss the opportunity to carry on with some of the good rituals and good traditions that it's not, I think it's two ways, right? It's always two ways about even doing Pride. It's celebrating the advancement that we've done, but we still have a lot of education to do. And this plays a really, really big part in signaling where we are, but also where we need to go. So that's what I see so far in a couple of organizations in Implicity at Zalando. But I'm happy to hear more ideas because I think there's a lot to do.
I mean,
your input too. Or
sure.
Anyone.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the best way to celebrate the LGBT staff is to ensure there is inclusion, right? So to ensure that they're being paid the same, that their bonus is the same, their equity is the same, that they are being promoted at the same rate, that they have access to senior leadership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So me as a gay man, that's how I want to be celebrated, that's how I want my company to celebrate me. But obviously, these are all structural things. And I think that another really great way to celebrate people that are being engaged is that we actually have a bonus at the end of the year that is paid together with our performance bonus for the ERG lead. So the 2 years that I was leading the Pride, I was actually paid for that work, that I was doing on top of my full-time job. So I think that's also another great way to celebrate that, to show that the company is putting their money where the mouth is, right? And show that, hey, we see what you're doing, we see how important that is, and we're going to pay you for that as well. And again, not always about money, but I think that's a good way to show how important and how that the company actually respects that.
Jorg, I'd love to hear your input too, please. I think you're muted.
Am I muted?
No, you're okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It's the AirPods sometimes disconnect. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do, and right now, like Oana said about the Corona times, the CSD parade is going to be virtual. But I mean, why don't celebrate it within the company, right? Plan something complying with social distancing in a park, get some people together and celebrate ourselves. Because this is, I think, like many times we are just waiting for special events to take place and special months and special occasions, but we can drive this within the company ourselves and do like a picnic, a lunch and learn about the topic and how the story about LGBTQ or the gay or Stonewall or the entire history of it. So, I mean, just engage within the company yourself. And this is, I think, a great opportunity to make people feel more included. Yeah.
Thank you. And Armando, do you have anything that you'd like to add on to that?
For LGBTI resources, we also ask a lot of people from the business to share their personal histories of coming out at the senior leadership level, employee level as well, so that we see that there are representation. And we actually had stories from, really positive stories from the LGBTI. So everybody was pretty much represented. So that was really cool. And then we had a party and a quiz on Zoom, and we have a lot of resources dedicated for that, and Slack channel and everything.
Amazing. Thank you everyone for sharing. Just stay in contact. New questions around sexuality and gender into an open platform at work for people to implement and suggest new ideas for inclusion. Would anyone like to take that one on? Rodrigo, I'm going to pick on you.
I actually don't understand this question. So if you could maybe explain it to me. I don't know if it's just me. I don't understand what you're asking here.
I guess it's kind of, how everything is changing, and it seems like there's always new information coming out around the LGBTQ plus community. How do you create an open space for this, for people who maybe don't have the first clue about how to engage with the community, how to celebrate it within the workplace? How can you make it accessible for everyone in the company to discuss it openly?
Okay. Well, I think it's about creating a safe space for everyone, right? And this goes even beyond the LGBT community. It's creating a safe space for people to ask questions and to make mistakes, because we don't know everything about everything, right? We're learning. I think someone mentioned this. I don't know if it was one that we're learning every day, right? and that goes to the LGBT population as well. So I think when it comes to creating this safe space, this environment, it's really about how open people are, and how the leaders are fostering, and HR specifically is fostering that discussion space, so giving times in all hands, sending emails to talk about it, creating small events here and there, bringing experts to talk about it, creating, I think ERG, so employee networks, is also a great way to create that safe space, because then you're going to have a dedicated group that, it's not dedicated full time, but, you have a group that is dedicated to that specific population. So I think that's also a good way. But again, I think this goes beyond the LGBT population. It's about the whole environment that you have in your company. If it's an environment that is safe for people to actually ask questions or no.
Does anyone have anything that they'd like to add to that?
I just wanted to say, I mean, I completely agree with that. And I think as a change, as you mentioned, the change is always happening. I think it's very important that, again, leadership is ready to listen to the community within the business, because one of the things that is not very nice when it happens is that decisions are made without the people, making. So the leadership will be making decisions about a certain group of people, without them being consulted in any sense. So I think listening is very important, because then you can basically target efforts in a more efficient way.
Can I just add something on that? Because it's a very, very good point to continue, because I've been through some experiences where people created, let's say, roundtables to really understand the community, to do kind of cross-cultural, cross-groups, cross-genders conversations, and the listening was not very active. If you invite people at the table to have a conversation, actually listen, right? Because I think we've seen situations where people are like, oh, but we've done these roundtables, but none of that went through, right? So it's very important who sits at that table and how well, I don't know, how open or coached they are to be open, because at some time you can't change who sits on the top of, your management board or your CEO. You can't change that, but you can maybe influence as HR or coach or other people in the organization to take this on board and not to necessarily go there in a defensive mode, because this can happen, right? This can be a situation, and it's super important to prepare yourself for everything and take it on board, and then just work with it as you can, but a little bit of an extra.
Perfect, thank you. And then, if no one has anything else that they would like to add on to that, I will move on to the next one. So yes, how do we tackle anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination at the workplace? Armando?
Yeah, I think we were discussing about everything else before, right? So I think the culture itself is the best tool that we have, organizational tool to prevent any issues regarding this. The last resource is going through this grievance and disciplinary measures, working in HR. This is like the last not so nice resource, but I think we really need to put emphasis in education. People should be aware that there's a space where they can be vocal about their concerns. There should be policies and procedures in place so that everybody knows what to counsel, and the code of conduct is also something really important. Interviewers should also have training. So managers that a lot of times make interviews, they can be easily biased, I pick somebody that looks like me and that's going to make it less diverse, right? And at the end, I think if you take all of these preventive measures, you are able to be really active in anti-discriminating against the people, right? That's what I think about that.
Thank you. Jorg, what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, so it's really important to start raising awareness and educate people without a doubt. I think bias workshops are great for that in terms of like hiring managers and basically everyone in the company. Some sort of code of conduct. So again, the example that I have, TaxFix, we create guides that starts with a very positive message that everybody makes mistakes and things happen, right? And we start by to be more inclusive in the language, in how should you approach your colleagues in the TaxFix. And then in the end, we touch the point of discrimination and harassment, and that this can have consequences. And what I like about the inclusivity guide is that not only we touch harassment and discrimination, but we also talk about like victimization, that victimization is also not that if they play the victim happen, that consequences can happen as well. So I think this is a great that we can take beyond this, but I think like this is a very good starting point to make people more comfortable. And this we do have a DNI part of the onboarding where we talk about the specificities of this inclusivity, and everybody in the company has access to it from the beginning.
But I think if I can just add something there, that there is a lot of unfortunately there's no this is not a simple answer, right? It's not black and white, because there's a lot of things that can go into there, especially if your company is spread in several countries. For instance, if we're talking about Middle East or North Africa, in countries where it's illegal to be LGBT, something that might not be perceived as discrimination there could be perceived as discrimination here in Amsterdam or in Berlin. So I think there's a lot of cultural elements that could play into that. And then in this case, the ER team or the HR, whoever is going to handle that, needs to be sensitive to the situation. And again, I think here, discrimination against LGBT, it's also very broad. So there could be, if we're talking about a Black lesbian cisgender woman, we could be talking about lesbophobia, could be talking about racism, we could be talking about sexism as well. So there's a lot of layers that could go into that. So whoever is going to tackle this issue needs to be trained in how to do a proper investigation on these things, to ensure that you really understand what's going on, the underlying concerns there, so you can act appropriately, that being either suspension, a termination, like whatever that's going to be, or even the person staying but mediating the conflict moving forward, and doing a education session also. There's a lot of things that can go into that. So it's quite a complex issue. And because of that, the answer, I think, is quite complex as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Oana, do you have any contribution to this one?
So much. I think everybody is right, and it's never black and white, right? Sorry, I'm thinking about it. But where the problem needs to be a little bit put is on, again, the person affected, right? Because we look a lot about how do we punish or how do we identify, but how do we protect? This is a very interesting perspective to have. And even on our side, knowing our rights is super important, right? It's not just what the organization can provide. There's also a lot of legal and framework that exists, again, country by country. But knowing your rights can give you, as let's say a victim or somebody affected by discrimination or harassment, more confidence to act and act timely before it actually becomes bigger than one incident, right? So I think that's all, but everybody's is right.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so I think just before we head to Q&A, there's one final topic. I feel like this one is in itself, but policy. Essentially, it's should all of our bathrooms be gender neutral? Who wants to take this one on first?
I can take that one. Yes and no. That doesn't really answer the question, but I think there should be the option of gender neutral bathrooms. I think like the larger the community gets and the more, let's say, culturally diverse we become, we should have into account people that don't feel comfortable with that, right? And if you do want to create the space just for gender neutral bathrooms, you should be aware of a lot of constraints coming from other people, for example. Because what some companies do and what I've seen sometimes is that, for example, the gender neutral bathroom has urinals on it. So it doesn't make much sense to have like people exposed that way, right? In other companies, they have urinals and they've put plant vases on it for people not to use it. So I do believe we should have, but not exclusively.
I think this is it's a very complex, but it's also a very easy question at the end. I think two sides. So, I mean, the point of people going to the toilet is, you know, to do like one thing, right? So I think everybody agrees with that. So I think that's the underlying perspective. But if we look about, like, if you look into history, for instance, in the US, the white people were not happy, you know, sharing a toilet in the past with a black person because they were dirty and they were considered to be, you know, lower level. Or, you know, disabled people also, there was a fight that had to be fought to be able for people to have access and you know, building accessibilities for disabled people. So I think it's very entrained and in the thought process of the people how we are dealing with this as a society. And, you know, as you were mentioning, George, when we talk about the community increasing, we also can talk about intersex people, right? So basically, you know, this example, there was a runner and she was super good, you know, as she was a woman, she identified as a cis woman, and she was running and she won everything. And then they made tests to her, and then they identified that her testosterone levels were really high. So actually the chromosome that, you know, she had was really kind of, you know, testosterone as high as a man. So that's why she was winning, you know. So this person has everything to be a woman in this sense, but she's intersex. Do you not allow her? What toilet should we, you know, allow her to use? And also, I mean, gay cis men, they also use the toilets, and we don't know, you know, it's just because of the genitalia in this sense why we are putting the people into boxes. And then I can understand that some people, you know, also don't feel comfortable with that sense or have concerns about security and everything. But I think toilets are kind of the same level of security in this sense, and you know, the same levels of insecurity in a certain way in companies, if you know what I mean. And it's really about education, it's really about self-reflection, and I think it's a systemic issue that will not go so easily done. And of course we can also talk about the benefits of, you know, having the urinals or not having the urinals, and having the plants or not having the plants, or not, you know, just having one place to clean. There are pros and cons, but I think it's about how people feel about the topic and how we've been raised. Like, let's say, like in the northern countries, for instance, there is a lot of gender neutral toilets, like Sweden, Norway, you know, and it's not because of that they're becoming more insecure. It's just that their society, for example, hasn't been exposed to, you know, certain cultural aspects. So the gender balance is much bigger, for instance. And I think we have to think about it as a collective and not just yes or no. So that's why I said at the beginning, it's a very complex question but it's also a very easy one of the purpose of going to the toilet, right?
I'll add on the why is it easy to say yes to this. So it's first of all, you're giving options to even more people, right? If I think about you have your trans, let's say, that needs safe space, there is actually a mapping network in the US called Safe to Pee, because this is where we are today. We need to understand where it's safe to go to the toilet, right? And this is not the society that we want to be in. But you also have, let's say, dads with their girls needing to go to the toilet. Where do you go? Because you might get a purse in your head if you are in the wrong bathroom. And you have people with disabilities that have a caretaker, right? And this is beyond, I would say, LGBTQ community, but it is primarily in terms of safety, right? How do we also signal inclusivity? And this can be addressed. It is not rocket science to just change one of your bathrooms. It depends how big your office is, if we talk about the workspace, right? And beyond that, I think it's a nice example to really show your society in your groups. We have, for example, we had in France, every Wednesday, you had a lot of kids coming to work to their parents because school finishes early, right? So you were already signaling a young generation of how things should be. And I would think about this aspect, right? The impact that you can have with just making simple choices sometimes.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, like I said, I feel like we could talk about this for years and still would we get to the final answer. But yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, so if everyone is happy to, I think we're going to move on to the Q&A. We have around 9 minutes left. So I saw a few questions coming in, and yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of get everyone's insights on them. Mine's loading. Okay.
Good questions.
Okay. And so, yeah, so I'm going to choose this one. So how do you authentically drive D&I in an employer branding perspective without being perceived as patronizing or fake? It's a good one. Who wants to take this one?
I think we can do all this just quick one. I mean, in the previous, we had our slogan for the LGBTI in my previous role in the company, and the slogan was "Authenticity counts," right? I think we need to come from a place of humanism, and of course, we can use the branding to make it work in our favor as a company. But I think we need to be really human in terms of understanding that everybody is diverse and everybody is unique. And when you have this in mind, when your intention is going in this direction, it's much easier to develop a D&I. Of course, you have like the technical aspects of it that you discuss within HR and the resource group and how to implement everything, But I think the intention should be in the right place and the vision should be in the right place. Because if you use it just for branding and you don't have a really good, strong intention behind it, it's not going to work.
I can chime in very, very quickly. We are seeing this tendency to incorporate true stories of your employees, right? And that is the authentic content, user-generated content, right? That people relate to. And I think everybody can bring, as Armando was saying, their uniqueness, right? We bring our diversity and we showcase this, but then in the same time, we build this uncommon commonalities. I think it's a term that I've discovered recently, and it's so interesting to just make sure that you do give space. I do love, for example, Zolando's campaign. It's a more brand campaign. It's not so much employer brand, but I use it for my employer brand conversation as well. Free to be, right? If you stand for something, how can you actually find that within your groups, and then make sure that when you are attracting talent, that reflects, right? That truly reflects. But it is becoming maybe a more tricky issue when you are a small group of people and you don't actually have that diversity yet, right? So maybe that's somebody else who would like to chime in.
I think a great way to show that, besides obviously the policies that you create internally to ensure that you have an inclusive environment, it's how you're engaging with the communities, right? So how are you engaging with we're talking LGBT, so how is your company or your brand actually engaging with the LGBT community? What are you doing for them throughout the year, not only in Pride Month? Is your product actually diverse? Are you actually catering to people that are, to a vast array of clients and people that think differently or have, and then we could open a Pandora box here, depending on what kind of product the company offers. So I think that those are two very concrete ways that you can show that you are not fake, because you actually can put concrete steps that you're doing towards driving inclusivity in the LGBT community, even externally to your own company.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Just for time's sake, I'm going to move on to the next one. And it's about data. So I'll just get it up there. So they said, I totally get data, but how do you go about collecting it without people having to lay out their gender identity / sexuality to their employer?
I'll just start with this because I think I started the conversation, right? It's difficult. And again, you have various legislation in different countries. So first, check with your legal, check with your compliance, check with everybody in terms of how do we actually go about whether we can collect, like in the US, on application. You have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, right? So it's much, you tick boxes and it's kind of embedded in the system. Now I think in the organizations I've been, there are specific surveys when people can opt in, right? And it's important to understand why you're doing this survey, so to really ensure on the usage of the data to create and better policies. I think the fear for being discriminated for after being labeled, it's real, right? It's real. If you don't trust your organization, I would not advise you giving your information. The other side, maybe what I've seen in other organizations, that maybe they don't even have big HR companies, but they would like to really groups, but they would like to address it, is externalize. So then your data is anonymous, but the results are yours. So you kind of mix and match.
Perfect. Would anyone else like to add on to that?
I mean, I would like to probably touch the point, covering a bit of what Johanna told in the beginning. I mean, data is very tricky. It's very difficult to collect. You really do need to be careful with the legal constraints, especially because I was collecting data for a big multinational company from 92 different countries. And every country had their data constraints. So for example, you cannot gather gender data, for example. The US has several other constraints. So this makes it very difficult hiring, complying with all this legal stuff, hiring an external partner and then having like all the data gathered without infringing any country's legal constraints. I think that's the best way to go. But still, we need to be very careful here.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add on to that before we go to one more question? No? Okay. So the final question that I'm going to ask is, do you feel it's appropriate to ask new joiners when they start how they like to be addressed, so their pronouns? Armando?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think that's a tricky one. I actually, to prepare a bit my conversation about this topic, I spoke to with a friend of mine, and they are transgender, and I think at the workplace, if we start for one side, if we start asking at the beginning, a lot of people would say, of course, I'm a he. Why would you, why would you assume otherwise? And at the same time, I think it's about politeness. If you don't want to ask that, if the people, state, I'm sure that if you made the position or if you want to be identified a certain way, that you had challenges where you were misgendered. But I think when you misgender people on purpose, when your company in letters and everything, so when you misgender somebody on purpose, that's when the problem starts. Because I think usually if people are misgendered, they will say, okay, I want to be treated by he, she, they, right? And from then on, you should be able to address that, right? And not call the person somebody else based on what you want. But if we want to make it like a common kind of process, asking every single person, that's not something that I would have it like as a definition, but I would definitely also consult part of the community. What do they feel about that? If you don't identify with the binary spectrum, to kind of have more input about that.
I actually disagree with that. And one thing that I'm trying to implement here at Uber is actually even asking candidates how, not even employees, but actually candidates as well, how they want to be addressed. And I think if this is asked to everyone, it's not going to be a problem, because then the person is going to choose how they want to be, be addressed, like, and this could even start a conversation around gender identity, a bigger conversation in the company, and be an educational opportunity as well.
I'm on a path, to be honest, for this topic to learn and understand, because I think it's very, very important. And just to continue on what Rodrigo was saying, there is a mini research from a university in the US, I think Rochester, and they implemented this by default to their students, right? Like, you come in, you are accepted, and you kind of nominate which pronoun you want to be used. And after a couple of editions, they realized it was generating a lot of anxiety for those who were not ready to share or not really knowing what to share. So I think it's really a very, very interesting conversation, and I'm very happy we're having it. I'm sure this is going to carry on, but in interest of time, I just wanted to add that part.
I think we would not find all the pronouns. I've seen pronouns from all the spectrum, so it's very interesting. But I think the most important thing is to base yourself, the way you treat others, with respect, knowing what the person wants to be called, and I think that's the foundation of a healthy, if you don't want to make like really like put everybody in the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boxes. I think it's the healthiest, that you really feel, I'm sorry, I will treat you the other way. But I understand also from a systems perspective, and it's really great. It creates the discussion about gender, and I completely agree with you, Rodrigo, about this point.
Nice. And so, Jorge, do you have any final comments on this?
Not really. I really agree with what everybody says. I mean, I don't have for this topic much to add. I really think it depends on how people feel comfortable. That we shouldn't force people to do it, but on the other hand, I truly believe, like Ricardo said, doing it on the candidate side to begin with, I think that's a very interesting approach to it.
Perfect. Much. I think we're going to end it there. It's just after 7 now. So I would like to thank all of the attendees for coming to today's Talking Talent event. And I would also like to thank all of the speakers. We gained some really great, amazing insights, and I'm sure we're going to be sharing them with everyone. we're going to record this and it will be posted to our YouTube channel, hopefully, so you can revisit. And yeah, make sure to keep an eye out for more Talking Talent events in the future. And yeah, and make sure if you have any questions or you want to follow up with anything, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, Paul Power, or any of the speakers, and I'm sure we'll be happy to help you out with anything. So yeah, thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.